And in most of our Bibles, it says right at the top of the psalm, a prayer of David when he was in the cave. I want to talk to you today about caves, and in particular caves of disappointment and discouragement. For many years, things went really well for David. Samuel the prophet had anointed him. Saul the king had employed him. He defeated Goliath. People loved him. The army respected him. He was on his way to the palace to ascend to the throne as the next king. But on his way to the throne, some very difficult things began to happen to him. First, he lost his job. He had been an unknown shepherd, and in one day, he had been promoted to court musician and then to general in the army. So in a very short period of time, for such a young guy, David became the most successful army officer in the history of Israel. And then the commander-in-chief, Saul, became insanely jealous. And he tried to kill David with a spear. And David lost his job. He lost his income. He went from the most highly respected general to a fugitive running for his life. I want us to pick up the story. It's found in your bulletins. 1 Samuel 21. Then David fled from Saul and went to Achish, king of Gath. Anybody remember who lived in Gath? Tall guy, over 9 feet tall. Goliath. So David is now in the territory of his enemies because he had nowhere else to go. He's in the land of the Philistines. That day David fled from Saul, went to Achish, king of Gath, but the servants of Achish said to him, "Isn't this David, the king of the land? Isn't he the one they sing about in their dances? Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." David took these words to heart and was very much afraid of Achish, king of Gath. So he pretended to be insane in their presence. And while he was in their hands, he acted like a madman, making marks on the doors of the gate and letting saliva run down his beard. Achish said to his servants, "Look at that man. He's insane. Why do you bring him to me? Am I so short of madmen that you have to bring this fellow here to carry on like this in front of me? Must this man come into my house?" David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. I want to pause there for a moment. David is expecting a palace. He's waiting for the day that he would become king. He had position, he had wealth, he had fame, he had power, he had a secure future. All of that's gone. No money, no home, no job. He lost his wife in the process, no friends, no mentor anymore, and he's running for his life. He's thinking palace, and he ends up in a cave with no explanation as to why, no guarantee for how long this season of his life is going to last. So today I want to talk to you about those caves. The cave is where we end up when some of the scaffolding of our life gets knocked out from underneath us. When we have a loved one who dies, a spouse who leaves, we lose our job. The doctor's prognosis is bleak. We end up in caves of discouragement when the financial pressure becomes just unbearable. Or when we have dreams about our family that gets shattered. We really want to get married, that hasn't happened yet. Or maybe it has and we're really disappointed. Or maybe we have a child that we love and we had such high hopes for that child, and those hopes just aren't working out the way we think they ought to. Some of us are in a cave of discouragement right now, right here. Others of us aren't in a cave today, but we will be, because sooner or later, everybody spends time in a cave. I think what's hardest about being in the cave of discouragement is we really feel alone there. We feel like even God has lost track of us. Did God forget his promises? Will I ever be anywhere besides in this cave? Am I going to die in this cave? So one of the things I want you to walk away with today is that God does some of his best work in caves. About 10 years of David's life was spent in the wilderness, on the run, hiding in caves. 10 years. It must have looked like God's promises are never going to come true. David was not alone in the cave. There were others there who met him, and they formed a little community. Look at the rest of our passage. When his brothers and his father's household heard about it, they went down to him there. All those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered around him, and he became their commander. About 400 men were with him. The 3 Ds: those in distress, those in debt, and those who are discontented. Can you imagine life in that cave? 400 distressed, indebted, just all around unhappy people. Let's form a community. David's little community formed an army, moved out of the cave. Some got married, had children, and they formed this little village. And then one day they came home to find their little village had been burned. Their wives and sons and daughters had been taken captive. This is a new low for David. They're already outlaws, they're fugitives from their own country, so they had established this little outpost, and now it was gone. I don't know what you're going through, but whatever it is, I think David's going to be able to offer some good counsel for us, both by his own story and by his reflections that we find in the book of Psalms that Colby read for us, one of those, Psalm 142. There are 4 things I want to draw out of this for us today. The first is, and this is what's been helpful for me, so I'll share it with you. When I'm in the cave of discouragement, the first thing I do is discuss my discouragement openly with God, with Sheila, with close friends. I try and name it. What is this that has got me so down, so discouraged? That little inscription at the top of Psalm 142, praying from the cave of discouragement, lack of courage. When our bold heart leaves us, when courage fades, and we just begin going down and down. I cry aloud to the Lord, he says. I lift up my voice to the Lord for mercy. I pour out my complaint before him. Before him, I tell my trouble. The Psalms can be divided into a number of different categories. There are Psalms of praise. There are Psalms of thanksgiving. There are prayer Psalms of wisdom. But you know what the biggest category of Psalms is? Psalms of complaint, or of what we call lament. How long, O Lord, are you going to hide your face from me? How long before you show me mercy? When will you bring evildoers to justice? When will you hear my cry? Those kind of prayers. David goes to the very bottom of his pain and his discouragement, and he gets very still there. And that takes guts. We often know we have this in our lives. It's pulling us down. The pain, physical, emotional, whatever it is. But we tend to want to just stuff it and push through it. We don't want to have to look at it, don't want to have to name it or deal with it. We pretend it's okay. How are you doing? I'm good. Yeah, I'm all right. It's all good. We put on this stoic exterior, this smile, and we hopefully have learned by now in life, it really doesn't solve anything to do that. And some of us live with this chronic sense of discouragement, and after a while we just get used to it. But all the while, it's sucking the life out of us. And it's sucking the life out of those around us who love us. You see, it's possible to never face the pain in our life, to never get quiet enough, to never talk to someone, therapist, counselor, friend, spouse, to never perhaps pray about it, to never name what it is. And so it doesn't go away, doesn't get healed. God, on the other hand, encourages us to pour out our heart, pour out our complaints to Him, not to live in a chronic state of discouragement. So I've found it very helpful to cry out to God, to pour out my complaint to Him and to close friends. And the second thing I try to do to defeat this discouragement is to take some positive action. Figure out, why am I so down? And then do something about it. Something maybe having to do with relationships. So often once we peel the onion back, I think what really has got me down is my kids. And I identify that, and then I call them. Actually, Sheila says, you need to call your kids. So then I call them. Sometimes I'm down because there are people around me who are in a cave. And for some, it's a dark, scary cave. And what I need to do is just sit with them and listen to them. Maybe pray with them. And that often lifts my spirit and brings hope and courage back into my weakened heart. So first I try and name it, try and be totally honest about it. Then I try and do something about it. Sometimes it just involves me. Other times it involves me reaching out to somebody else who is hurting and discouraged. The third thing that I see David modeling for us while he's in this cave of discouragement is he resists the temptation to try and fix it fast. Take a shortcut so that he feels better. When I'm feeling sorry for myself, this is, I guess, my morning to confess. When I get overwhelmed by things going on in my life, I'll overeat. I'll overdrink. Someone going, I go shopping for things I can't afford. Does anybody ever do that just to feel better? Yeah. It kind of salves the soul till you get the bill and you go, what was I thinking? It's the temptation to get immediate relief, but it really doesn't help. It helps immediate, but long term, it has some real downsides. Look again into the life of David with me. I'm going to read another cave passage to you. It comes from 1 Samuel 24. After Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he's still in enemy territory, he was told, David is in the desert of En-Gedi. So Saul is chasing after David. He gets word that David's in the desert of En-Gedi. So Saul took 3,000 chosen men from all Israel and set out to look for David near the crags of the wild goats. And he came to the sheep pens along the way, and a cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself. David and his men were far back in the cave. The men said, David, this is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. Do you ever have friends who give you advice and you stop and you think, yeah, that makes sense? Then David crept up unnoticed and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Afterward, David was conscience-stricken for having even cut off a corner of the king's robe. And he said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lift my hand against him, for he is the anointed of the Lord. And with these words, David rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul. And Saul left the cave and went his way. David's in a cave, big cave, with some of his friends. Saul walks in the front of the cave to relieve himself. He doesn't see David and his men way back in the cave. And Saul's in this very vulnerable position. No guards around him. And his friends are whispering, David, kill him. God has promised the throne to you. This is your way out. This is our way out of this stinking cave. What a huge temptation for David. But he also knew he would be communicating to the whole nation that the way you get a new king is to kill the old one. Now, I don't know about you, but I tried to put myself in David's shoes, having been chased around in the desert for 10 years. I don't know that I could have resisted. It seems so obvious. God has promised me the throne. Here he is. David didn't know if we would ever get out of that cave. He didn't know if we would ever get another chance. There it is. We don't know what's around the corner for us. And that can cause us a great deal of worry and can cause us to take shortcuts to get to where we think we ought to be. So what I try and do is resist the temptation to numb out with things that don't solve my problem. Make the best decision that I can with what's right in front of me, getting the best counsel I can from people around me, trusting that God ultimately will pull me through this. And the fourth thing that David does is he finds his ultimate refuge in God. Psalm 142, I cry to you, O Lord, I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Some of us are in a cave that no human action is going to get us out of. It's totally beyond our control. And that alone is a scary thought, isn't it? That there's things going on in your life that are out of your control. And all that we can do is trust God. And as David writes over and over throughout his Psalms, take our refuge in him, our refuge. You know, God understands all about caves. He's been there. Jesus suffered just like we do. But he went on to be killed on a cross for sins he didn't commit. And then they put his body where? In a cave. They didn't know that God does some of his best work in caves. Caves are where God resurrects things. Caves are where we get new life and hope. We don't like living in a cave, but sometimes that's where we are. No matter what we're facing, we have each other, and ultimately, we have God as a refuge. God is the one we can run to and find safety in. So, our God, we bow before you. You know the caves that different ones of us are in today. And you even know the ones we're headed into. And I just want to thank you that you're a God that we can trust, a God of hope and not discouragement. You are a God of life and not death. Thank you that you have promised to be with us no matter what is going on in our lives. And we want to say to you today, we trust you. And we trust you in the name of the one who has promised to be with us no matter what. What a friend we have in Jesus.